Right. This is the course that's going to get taught here. And welcome back. And we'll go through stuff. My name is Dave Champlin. And we're going to start out talking about what you should do this week. I should start out by saying there are only going to be about 12 students in this course, like that. And so you have a small class. That's fine. That's good. And so that's where we're at for class numbers. And then here's what you're going to be doing this week. So the first thing to say is I've already sent out a couple of emails, and I send out emails to your USM email addresses. And I've put a couple of things on Brightspace. I'm already done putting stuff on Brightspace. I work so much on emails. I'm now the chair of the department, so I get a lot of emails. And so it's very convenient for me to focus on getting emails, processed like that. And so I will just send out a couple of emails a week, and you'll see, we'll talk about what they are. But I number the subject line, and then I put our course name in it, so you'll be able to easily, no matter how many emails you get, you can easily search through them and identify what's expected. And so I already sent out a couple of emails, and I don't think anybody has added the class recently, but if you did, let me know so I make sure you're up to speed on that. So what we're going to be doing this week, what you should be doing each week, is I sent out these 5 links to some videos that are about muscle differentiation in our body and in every animal that has muscles like that. And our focus is especially going to be on the genes involved in muscle differentiation. So when we make muscles, right, we inherited the genes from our parents, but as an early embryo, there are no muscles in the cells. So we've got the genes, they're not yet being expressed. And then at some point, your heart starts to beat, that's a muscle. So at some point you start to make muscles, and that's muscle differentiation. The developing cells start to have a fate or a role like that, pancreas, brain, and so forth, muscle. And so it could be about any tissue. It's muscle because a lot of students are have some familiarity with, the muscle protein, actin and myosin, right? We got to make actin and myosin. So that's the topic, but it's and we'll talk a lot about it. That's the topic in the videos. But it's a very general example of regulation of gene expression, which we'll talk about a lot. So in general, instead of referring to them as muscle differentiation videos in our course, I'll refer to them as clay model videos because I use little pieces of clay to represent the genes that are being expressed. Why clay? Because clay can be manipulated, and I even talk a little bit about that in the video. And we'll talk a lot about that because our course is a lot about DNA and the storage of information and then how scientists understand it. So you want to watch those, and I emphasize over and over again, much of that is, I consider to be prerequisite stuff that could have been learned in intro biology, and and maybe you didn't get it all. But it's the terms, the concepts that we'll just be rolling on. And so you almost certainly want to watch those a couple of times. You want to take notes anytime you're doing stuff at home, in the book or any videos we have or anything like that. And then include in those notes questions and confusion, and just bring those to class. We'll talk a lot about that. Everything in this course is very understandable, but it takes time to sink in, and sometimes we got to talk around about it a couple of times. So a week from today, at the end of the class, we're going to have a quiz on those clay model videos, and then a week from this Thursday at the end of class, I'll have some clay and we'll build some of those clay models to really try to really stick that knowledge into your head so we can really use it. So probably take the notes, watch the videos a couple of times. And then you can start reading chapter 1. And the first chapters we're going to read our book are chapter 1 and then chapter 4. And we'll talk about why we're skipping chapters 2 and 3, but 1 and then 4. And I was able to put those chapters on the closed reserve in the library, electronic closed reserve, and there are links on our Brightspace page. So if you don't happen to have the book yet, you can read those first 2 chapters. I won't be able to put more on, but if you haven't got the book quite yet, you can keep up. Our highest priority to start off is the videos. So get the videos done, but then start looking at chapter 1, which is an overview, and we'll go through it, like that. Okay? So that's our goals, just to get those on the front, right? And again, when you're reading the book, take notes. We'll talk some about taking notes in our course and include questions, confusion like that, okay? Next thing, and we'll kind of roll with this, and anytime you interrupt with questions or confusions, that's great. You don't even have to raise your hand, right? It's a tiny class, just say, oh, wait a minute, right? And it could be anything, right? I always bring my textbook. I encourage you to do that too, because sometimes a student will say, I'm looking at page 281, what do we have to know? You know, what's this about, right? That's really good. And we'll talk about that. So just to get going on our course is actually 2 courses in one. It's cell biology and molecular biology. And when I was in college, I had a course, cell biology, and we'll talk about what that course is. Hi, there's a syllabus right back there. Right there, yeah, awesome, welcome. And, you know, so we'll talk about what is cell biology and then what is molecular biology, like that. And when I was in college, was there a course in molecular biology? No, it's, both these fields are relatively new fields and really, you know, started small and then exploded more and more, like that. For now, I'll just mention that these topics have impacted just about every area of biology in a radical and transformative way, you know, including ecology. We're talking about nuts and bolts, but ecology, anything, evolutionary biology, just as such, almost every college and university uses the first semester intro biology as a course in cell and molecular biology. So every textbook, really I don't know of any other school that would have something else as the first semester. So you've had this, but we'll talk and we'll learn about how even though these topics are very accessible and understandable, there's something about intro biology where the concepts just don't seem to really truly stick, where you really go like, I know this stuff now. Like I'm a car mechanic of biology now. You know, I could take a cell and put it together and understand it. So that's interesting, but at least you know the basic topics. We're gonna crank through like that, okay? So that's that. Here's just the links. You've got those already, but here's just the links to emphasize those. You've got those, and you want to go through those. I made those. You know, I tried to do a good job and, you know, make it just right like that. Here's just a picture, what it looks like, right? And it's 2 cells, and this is a precursor, and that's a muscle cell, and it's going through development, and it happens in every one of our cells that make muscles. But we'll especially focus on the genes, and we'll talk about those, and we'll have a quiz on them. We'll build models on them like that, okay? Next thing, let me just describe the first time I taught this course because it's relevant, and it really has to do with bringing questions to class, like that idea of writing stuff down. Even if it's stuff in class, it's good to write it down and say, I have a question about that, because we roll forward and you're like, I'm still kind of distracted and I've kind of forgotten even what I was wanting to ask about, right? Just write it down. And again, it doesn't have to be a fancy question. It can just be like, what the heck, right? I have a friend who has like a toddler, and the toddler knows the phrase, what the heck, like that. And so she just wanted, what the heck? Oh, what the heck? Oh, God. Oh, what the heck? Like that all day long. Everything for a toddler. So you can even raise your hand and be like, what the heck? Just what the heck? Okay, first time I taught this course. So I'm a molecular biologist, and I should just describe that, just really quickly, my background. When I was the summer before I started college, I already knew what I was going to college to. I was going to college to be a scientist who was going to be a researcher and study the biological basis of animal behavior. I grew up in a little farming town in Minnesota. I was outside all the time, in nature, and we had all the pets, you know, and I was just really interested in what is like instinctive behavior, and not so much like the, you know, animal doing it, but like how is that built into a brain? And so I was going to major in biology and psychology, but really biology like that. And I was showing up like to do that, and I took off, so double major, and where I went to school, it was hard to get a double major, so I had to map everything out, you know, and I was just going for that. for sure. Second year in college, we had a separate library that was called the science library, and I'm in the science library studying, and I don't know, I guess I was taking a break, and here are just the regular books on the shelves, and I was looking, and I wandered over, and I picked up this book from the shelf, like that. It's a science book, it's a biology book, just picked it up. And somehow, I know why it attracted my attention, but anyway. And I stood there and I just read it. And the book was about molecular biology. And it was like boom, 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 with references. Here's the reference to the data. Wow, how we know this, how we know this, how we know this, like that. And it was written in a style of language, but even a font that was just like choo, 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 choo. I stood there for 10 minutes, and in college I was just a tremendous loser, like that. So, for example, I wore bedroom slippers, and I went to college in Minnesota on a hill through the snow in bedroom slippers, and you're just like, like, you want to go on a date with me? And you're like, oh no, no way, And I said, after 10 minutes of looking at this book, I said to myself, I said out loud, I am going to steal this book. And I walked out of there. I could have checked it out, but I walked out, I held it up over the little detector. I don't know if I ever took it back or what happened, but I was like that, right? And it was a book about molecular biology, and I shifted my thing. I would be a molecular biologist. So I'm a molecular biologist, like that. And I'm old, and much of molecular biology has been, in my, lifetime studying it, right? It's just exploding like that. So, I know all the people like that. So, but I didn't get hired to teach this because I went to grad school as a molecular biologist, but then I went to Saddle and I became a developmental biologist. We'll talk a little bit about that, but that's what I got really hired to teach here. So I didn't teach molecular biology. This other professor did. And then about 7 years ago, that professor abruptly left. And so I was told to teach this. And, it was this little notice, right? But I was like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I could teach that. I super love these topics. Like, I'm going to start crying almost right now, just talking about how much this is so cool. And so I just took the book that professor was using, we used that book. And that book had 8 authors, And it was like holiday break, right? Because it was in between semesters, right? So I wasn't really looking. There's a syllabus right there by you. Yep. And welcome. And so, I was kind of, not really looking because it's molecular biology. I could just walk in on that, like that. And I look at it, and the 8 authors, I know 6 of them really well. I had them for classes in grad school, or worked with them, or just knew them from meetings and stuff, And I start looking at the book, and the book is just exactly how I talk about this stuff. And prior to that, right, I had been a professor, and I thought the deal was, based on my experience, most of the books are kind of crappy. Really, they're books, but they're just kind of crappy. And my role in class was to I can explain this better. And I know that sounds really egocentric, but that was my thing. And then this is just like boom, boom, boom. Oh, the flow of it, everything about it is how I was trained and how I thought and how I teach. So when I taught the class, I came in, right? This is 7 years ago, the first time I taught this course, and I said that to the students. I explained it, and I said, and I had never done this before, I don't have anything to say. This is a good book, right? I don't have anything to say. So the entire semester is going to be just you asking questions about confusion or this or that, right? From the book, like that. And that's hard. I don't know if you've ever had a class like that. I had one class like that in college, and that's hard, where it's just like, go, and it's just like, I have nothing to say, but I have everything to say if you have things like that. So that was my first experience with this, right? And so that's why I emphasize, write down the questions, because it's like that. It's still like that. This book is different. I switched it because that book was actually also really hard. This book is easier and will also, it's still hard, but it's easier. And I have stuff to say about it because we're going to kind of navigate through it in a special way, like that. This book, the author, Jeff Cooper, has been studying molecular biology in Boston for like almost 50 years. Like when he was your age, he started on this topic. And the topic he started on was a gene that causes cancer. And we'll talk about why, but this course is a lot about cancer and molecular mechanisms of cancer. Today we'll talk about that. But the first time I taught this course, the whole semester was just questions, and that was hard. But the students got in the groove, right, like that, and brought in questions, and it was good. Like at the end, at least some of the students said, wow, that was a good experience, right? Like that, because it was really kind of participatory. But so that was just 7 years ago, and I've shifted over like that because I have stuff to say, but I still super love it if you can find questions and bring them in like that, because I really hope I can help you understand it. It's understandable. Everything is understandable. But again, it takes some time to sink in, and sometimes we have to spiral around, right? We stack it up and we spiral around and talk through it again. Like those videos, I say you got to understand them, but you'll see later in our course, we'll be looping back through them, and you'll watch them again 2/3 of the way through the semester, right? And you'll be like, oh, okay, I got this now, like that. So that's important to appreciate this, the value of those questions. And again, they can be anything. What the heck? What do we need to know from this, section or this figure, or specific, stuff, terms and stuff like that? That'd be great. Okay, then it's really important to take notes in class. I've always tried to emphasize that, and you're doing different things. People who study learning have shown that the best way to learn science topics is to be writing and drawing them. They're physical, and you can represent them physically, right? That's why there's so many diagrams in our textbook, right? Label diagrams, simple label drawings, and drawings and things like that. So it's really valuable to take notes. You're learning as you take them. You're also paying attention more because you're processing it like that. Then you're also building a study guide for studying for the exams, right? Like that. And so that note taking is really good. As a way to help emphasize that, most of the way through our class, we'll stop each time and we'll have what I call a concept chat. The concept chat, you'll just randomly pair up with a classmate, and you'll try to identify what you thought were the 3 most important things we've talked about today. And the intention is to have you look at your notes and be like, okay, that one, that, and that. And then also, you'll see other students' notes, and some of them take better notes, worse notes, different notes, and that will also be nice because, as you stand, I'm taking your notes, right? How many different ways are there to take notes? Well, there are a bunch of different ways, like that. So we'll try to mix it up and do that, okay? Before I forget, we have at USM, there's the COVID policies, and we have to adhere to the COVID policies like that. And those could change, right? So we need to be sensitive. And if you have COVID, there are rules, you have to follow them like that. There's a rule for class, and my understanding, the rule for class is still that masks are required in class unless the instructor says they're optional. So I will say they're optional. When we get together in a concept chat, I'll try to have masks here, because you might want to put a mask on right during that time, I think, right? But it's optional, and we want to be respectful, thoughtful, right? Hopefully, Americans learned that if you have a cold or a flu or that RSV, if you're going to come to class and you have anything like an infectious disease, you wear a mask, right? Like that. Hopefully we have that, but we know we don't, so. But, that's a good thing, right? So we want to think about that. And then if what I just said about COVID is in any way confusing or concerning now or at any time, just send me an email. I mean, you can talk to me, but, right, it's kind of medical information, so you can talk to me privately, email me, just let me know, right? If there's anything about this, just let me know. We'll talk more about it. Our course is designed to navigate through this time when we still have, a pandemic going on, right? Like that. Okay, but we'll do these concept chats and we'll go through that. We'll try to do that, and that will also try to help you with your note taking and thinking about it. Then also help you in asking questions, right? To get you to speak up, right? Because after we do the concept chat, I'll just ask 2 or 3 people, well, what did your group talk about? And I have a really hard time calling on students, right? Like, what's that, But if you just talk to another person, right, that kind of distributes some of the pressure, right? Because what did you guys talk about? And you're just reporting that. I'm not challenging, your understanding, right? Like that. So we'll do that. And then the third thing, which is curious, is that in this concept chat, you are recalling stuff. And it turns out that in learning, recall is what it's about. So when you learn a song, right, you hear it, and then you recall it and sing it. And then you try again, and you recall and sing it. And the more recall you do, the stronger you learn it, literally. So the idea of me up here just going blah, 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 and that you're learning it is just false. So we have to think about that, and that's part of that concept chat, to try to get you to reflect on class and after class and over time when you're studying and so forth, is it's all about that recall. And a good way to recall would be to say it or write it down. You can pretend you're recalling, but to actually, say it or write it down. So we'll talk about that idea, recall and how to learn this material. Okay, great. Next thing, here's an idea that I teach all my classes that is arguably true, but I just made it up, okay? But we need to learn it, okay? And I'll explain it, and then you'll see why I'm explaining it. So I say the entire biology, which is huge, is a three-legged stool, like that. It has 3 legs. There are really 3 topics fundamentally in biology. Like, and a way of saying I made it up is if you walked around to the other professors in the biology department and you said, oh, Dave says there are 3 topics in biology, what are they? None of them would say these 3, right? And I'm not going to criticize them, but that's because they're nice. But this is really a good thing. So the 3 legs of biology, the topics are physiology, and every living thing has physiology. Every cell has physiology. Physiology is what it means to be alive. Being alive is a bunch of chemistry. When a cell is alive, it has physiology. When it's dead, it doesn't. So we usually think of physiology when we think of our body, heart pumping, and that's good, right? But bacteria have cellular physiology. It's about being alive and the biochemical processes at the cellular level of being alive. In this, I also put anatomy and something called morphology, which is closely related to anatomy. And most of paleontology, so people studying dinosaur skeletons, and stuff like that, fossils, that's mostly a physiological anatomy shape thing. How are you doing now? We usually think of like the mature organism in physiology, but we always have it. But like, how's your heart doing? How's your brain doing? Much of medicine is physiology, like that, traditionally, well, it's your health, like that. So that's one leg. And then the next leg is called development. And development used to be called embryology historically, and so that's where you came from. Where did you come from? Like that. And it includes some physiology because you're always alive, right? The fertilized egg is alive, and the embryo is alive, the fetus is alive, baby's alive, right? But there's something else happening that's different, and it's these developmental processes. And it's interesting because that used to be, although, like when I was in college, I took a course in embryology, but it was kind of a sidelined course, not one of the 3 legs like that. But it's just exploded. And one of the reasons it's exploded as a topic is because of the tremendous advances in molecular and cellular biology, like that, And so that's why I teach developmental biology, because I'm like, oh, I know all about that already, like that. So with that, those 2 legs describe everything that ever happens inside an organism. It's either a developmental story or a physiological story, like hemoglobin in the heart moving, oxygen, doing stuff like that, or muscle differentiation. That's developmental biology. That's everything that ever happens in an organism. And, there's a lot of overlap, of development and physiology, but there are some really distinct principles that are best taught in those different areas, and they're distinct topics. So that's the organism. And then this third leg is is ecology. That's the organism in its environment. And there's really good ways to explain why it's important to describe all of biology as a three-legged table. Here's one. So Darwin said evolution involves survival of the fittest through natural selection. Okay? So survival would be the organism in its environment. And the fittest is typically thought of as that physiology. Right? Modern horses evolved long legs in order to get away from predators and survive. So it's a physiological and anatomical kind of story like that. That's great, but you can see, and Darwin actually wrote about this. Darwin said, embryology fits in here somewhere, but I don't understand. Because when he was writing, there was, people knew, you're born and like that, but they did not understand it, right? And so you can see here that for the early 100 years of evolution, this leg was weak, and the entire field of biology was wobbly. So there are lots of people wandering around today going, I don't believe in evolution, and they have YouTube videos describing in detail about things like intelligent design. And it's because, biologists didn't really appreciate this, but the whole field was biology. And it was getting more wobbly all the time because there were lots of discoveries here, lots of discoveries there, but this was kind of stuck, And so it was getting more wobbly like that, okay? So there's a reason to describe it this way for that reason. And now it's really stable and strong because it's all tied together. For example, the horse evolved the long leg as a result of different mutations in genes that regulate bone development. The evolution of the modern horse's leg is all about development, right? Like that's what happened. That's where it's a natural selection was occurring, even though it was all about the horse getting away from the lion. The changes were all in the embryogenesis like that. So it's really sweet. Then this is also nice because the stool itself, the wood of the stool is evolution. That's where evolution fits in. It's everything. It's impossible to talk about any example in biology without talking about evolution. So everything we talk about in our course is evolution, and we'll talk about that. Okay? The next thing, and that's why we're talking about this in this course, the next thing is there are topics like you'd be like, hey, I really liked immunology. And where's that? So there's some courses and big topics in biology that are off to the side that are especially topics about that fit in here. Or like immunology, developmental biology is part of this, and physiology is part of that. But like neurobiology is another one. And then there are courses on topics like, say, ornithology. That's the study of birds. So there are a lot of courses that haven't been mentioned yet. And that's because their courses are all about these things. Then there's another set of courses that haven't been talked about, and they include genetics and cell biology, what we're going to learn about, molecular biology. They're also off to the side. Our course is off to the side. And it's important to say that because in our course, anytime we talk about an example, it's an example from here. So, some students have taken developmental biology, and I would like to use an example from developmental biology. All of cancer biology is developmental biology gone wrong, right? But to do that, I have to talk about developmental biology. And this isn't the course in developmental biology, right? And only a couple people have taken it. Or immunology, like that, So it's challenging to teach this course because we don't have those as prerequisites, right? I can't just jump into neurobiology and say, oh, you guys know how the nervous system works, and we want to talk about it at a molecular level, like that. So it's interesting, and that's the main reason why I said, let's teach this especially as a course on the molecular mechanisms of cancer. Because we need to, really develop an example. And at USM, there's no course that really talks a lot about cancer biology. So that's great. That's why I do it. Another reason is because molecular and cellular biology have driven cancer research forward. Like just over 50 years ago, the United States government declared war on cancer. It's like the early 1970s. People had just landed on the moon, right? So they had that space program and that goal, let's get, people on the moon, right? Success. Let's do another science thing. It's war on cancer. And we'll talk in our course that, like the author of our book, he was just a grad student, and there was suddenly tons of money to try to figure out what's going on in cancer. And the people who had the best opportunities were people who were studying genes and the mutations in genes. And well, what do those genes do, and how do they go awry in cancer like that? So it's heart and soul of molecular biology like that. So it's good because you haven't learned much cancer biology. It's good because it just cranks us through, and the author uses it that way, just like that through this course. And it's good also because it has personal relevance, right? That's part of our own health, and our friends and family, right, are going to deal with those kind of health topics. Now, in focusing on cancer, it's also going to be broadly about biology. So if a student was in here and was interested in turtles or fish or plants, it'll be fine, right? You'll get, because we're going to be talking about principles, but our example that we're really, really focused on a lot is cancer for those reasons, like that. And so I want to just explain that, like that, to help you understand how we're reaching into examples. And some of the examples we'll want to reach into will be in immunology. And raise your hand if you took immunology. Like, raise your hand right now if you have taken immunology. So see, 3 people have taken it, so they know about, we could jump into it for them and use an example from immunology, and they'd be, okay, all right, but not the rest of us, right? So we have to really be thoughtful and sensitive to that reality, okay? All right, how are we doing? Anybody have any questions, issues like that, confusion about how we're doing? Okay, and just anytime. So we have this textbook, and I say by the 8th edition, it's been out for a while, so you can buy inexpensive or rent inexpensive copies, and there'll be some questions from the exams that are out of the book that we didn't cover in class. So you really need the textbook. Not the 7th edition. There was a lot of changes from the 7th to the 8th, like that. But we'll be reading this. And that's going to be our textbook. Our textbook is divided up into 4 sections, big sections. It's got like 20 chapters divided into these 4 different sections. And it's the 4th section. It has 4 chapters. That the 4th section is called cellular regulation, but it's really cancer biology, the cellular and molecular mechanisms of cancer. So we're going to go like chapter 1, 4, 9, 17, 18, 19, 20 in our course. Like chapter 17 will be on our first exam, like that. Okay, so we got a path like that. And what the first chapters are kind of set up, some background, setting it up and stuff like that. But we want to get to this. Like that. And we'll talk a lot about that. Then we'll get those done, and then we'll loop back and pick up chapters from especially section 3, which has a lot of cell biology, but some of 2 and even back to 1, something like that. And I've done that I've probably taught with this book like 5 years now, right? And it works great, right? Because we're just cranking hard toward that goal. That's our textbook, and like I said, I have chapter 1 and 4 on closed reserve. You can find that on the Brightspace. And if you don't have the book yet, you can read them. Read it, okay? Then it's always important to talk about, well, what are the exams going to be like? All the exams are going to be short answer questions where each question is worth 2 points. So that affects our learning. Like it'll be a question like, what is the FOXO protein do? And why do we care? So, 2 points. 1, 2. And I don't really give half points, right? It's just like 1, 2, like that. The best, what's the best thing you'd say about that, right? So it's a lot of that kind of learning, and it's nuts and bolts learning, like that. And we'll talk a lot about that, how to do that. But just to say for now, the learning favors a kind of flashcard style, right? And so actual flashcards, where you make a flashcard, FOXO, and then at the back you write something about it. we'll talk extensively about it, but there's always also a kind of bottom line, right? And so it's important in questions in class to say, well, what's the bottom line with this? We've been talking about this, but what's the bottom line? Because to explain it and really have it sink in, you need to talk about it and explain it. And on the exam, you can use a lot of words like that. You can explain it in more detail. That's fine. But it's good to learn what is the core thing about this, right? And be boom, boom, boom like that. So kind of a flashcard thing. And you'll see that, so in taking your notes, it's good to be thinking about that even as you're taking notes. Like we say a keyword like FOXO, and you just put that out in the margin because you're like, okay, that's a thing. I'm identifying that thing and we're learning about it, right? So it's good to kind of try to even take notes, not building flashcards in class, but sort of already trying to see what it is we're talking about, and then that. And then add some stuff to that, and maybe another one out there like that. So, active, like learning like that. Let me just see what I got here. We'll also be doing this vertical learning, so we'll also be talking back about FOXO, right? So we'll come back to it. So that's another reason to get FOXO out in the margin, because when you're studying, you'll list page through, and you'll be like, oh, that's something about FOXO, but I know we talked about it before, so I'm going to find that, right? Those kind of keywords in your notes offset, or in big letters, or some people take, different colored notes, like that, Try to think about it like that. And so, like those play model videos, we'll come back and back and back. And so one of the keywords is one of the genes expresses a protein called myodin, and it's a transcription factor that activates myogenin, which activates target genes that make muscle, like that. So we'll say myodin over and over again. So it's good to put that out to the side. So when you're studying, you could just, kind of page through and try to find, this is where we learned about myodin, this is where we started on it, and, some more things, and maybe even rewrite your flashcard, like that, build a different flashcard or a sub-flashcard. And so, in that process, the next thing is, everybody has a concept of flashcards, right? Like that. Here, we'll see that kind of the next step up in that flashcard mentality is to actually have a simple, large background drawing that you're placing the flashcards out on. So let me just show you that. So here's an image from chapter 17. And it's an image, this is the cell membrane, this is the nucleus. So it's just a little portion of a cell, like in our bodies, eukaryotic cell. And it's showing that there is a molecule outside the cell, and it's like a hormone. Insulin would be a good example. Insulin is a hormone that never really comes into our cells. It binds at the cell surface to the insulin receptor, and then the insulin receptor is activated, and it activates a pathway of response inside the cell. In this case, what's happening is it's actually affecting gene expression in the nucleus. FOXO is actually what's called a transcription factor, like myodin and myogenin in our videos, like that. And to do its job, FOXO needs to get into the nucleus and bind DNA, like that, right? And so right now, it's inactivated. And so a role for this growth factor is to inactivate FOXO, like that, okay? So you can see that, and you can sort of see how, if you drew that out, it'd be helpful in your learning. And then also, well, we just talked about FOXO. We really didn't talk about PDK, right? So like here's another image of this story that's more streamlined, right? And you can see how there could be some flashcards laid out on this. And then you could pick them up, and learn over here, and then be remembering how they get set down, right? And that can be really helpful. It could be spatial, or it could be a timeline, and you just, set them up. And some of this sounds kind of dopey, I think, like kind of baby talk, kind of like, oh yeah, make a drawing and set it all out there and talk to your cat as you're doing it, like that. But it's a good way to recall, active learning recall. And so that's good. And then the next thing I want to say about FOXO is FOXO shows up in chapter 17, and we're molecular biologists. And so we're just going to be rocking this idea of this pathway, you know? And molecular biologists really don't really care what FOXO does, like that. And we'll talk some about that, you know, because we're going to talk about cancer, right, and stuff like that. What does it do? But it's really pretty amazing. And it's like being a car mechanic that doesn't really care about driving the car and going on a trip, right? Cars are awesome because you're driving fast and you go on a trip, go to the movies, like that. That's what's cool about cars. But there are plenty of car mechanics that are just like, the carburetor is nuts on this car. And that's what a molecular biologist is like. It's nuts and bolts, factual cause and effect relationships, like that, and that's it, right? And every once in a while, we'll try to insert this because it's a big motivator for learning. FOXO, when it's allowed to go into the nucleus, slows down the rate of aging. And there are FOXO proteins in our bodies that can do that. And you don't see that being too much of a factor in human life, but in lots of simpler organisms, FOXO throws this unbelievably intense switch. Like in all the insect species that are hibernating right now, they're overwintering partly because FOXO is in the nucleus, slowing down their rate of aging. There's a version of FOXO in every animal. And in some animals, they evolved the regulation of FOXO so it really adjusts the rate of aging depending on, like an environmental thing, like the winter. Short days activates FOXO. So the animal slows down the rate of aging so it could be young and reproduce in the spring, right? It's not that it's cold. You could have that animal inside and it would be slowing down its rate of aging. And by studying simple model organisms like fruit flies and little nematode worms, scientists know tons about FOXO, like that. And it's just profoundly impacting human health, research in human health. There's a lot of talk about that you can see in aging. So it's interesting to see this, that you're like, oh my God, I love FOXO. But molecular biologists are like, oh my God, look at how it's excluded from the nucleus by this protein 1433. Right? So we'll learn about 1433 a little bit. And one time I taught this course, and I wanted to mention 1433 again in a different context, right? And I said, oh, if anybody knows what this protein is, they get an A for the course. And one of the students just raised his hand and be like, 1433, and I was like, dang it, yep. Yeah, like that. It's just like, we're just down at this nuts and bolts level. That makes it physical, and you can draw it out, map it out like that. It makes it learnable. It's a cause and effect relationship. It makes it like a song, The insulin binds to the insulin receptor, activates this PI3 kinase, which phosphorylates this, and then AKT gets phosphorylated, and AKT is going to phosphorylate FOXO, 14.3, like that. And maybe there's some choruses like, I want to live a long time, yeah, okay? Like that. And just again to look at what FOXO does. What does it do? Well, it changes these kind of activities in the cell. Metabolism, DNA repair, protection mechanisms like making, protecting from free radicals, and that kind of, chemical damage, like that. And it does a lot of stuff like that, okay? And then here's from, this is from our textbook, but our textbook, I think this is from our textbook, dives into it some, and talks about FOXO in these different organisms, and sometimes it has a different name, but we'll just learn the one name, like that, like that, and its role, like that. So, we rove across all of, in our course, really animal biology, like that, at this molecular and cellular level. I just want to mention this. Here's a woman, Cynthia Kenyon, she's probably 70 years old, like that, and her entire career was studying FOXO. She started out in this simple little worm called a nematode and looked at genetic mutations that affected its rate of aging, and she learned about it. And I just want to show you where Cynthia Kenyon is at. You know that this company, Google, has billions of dollars like that. And it may, I don't know, 10 years ago, Google made a parent company, which everybody thought was really surprising, right? Because Google owned itself, but then it made a parent company that owned itself called Alphabet. And Alphabet built some other companies like that, So Google's spending billions of dollars, and sometimes you hear what Google's doing, but most of the time you don't hear what Alphabet's doing, which is really what Google's doing. And one of the companies that Google is, through Alphabet, pouring billions of dollars in is called Calico, like that. And it stands for the California Life Company. And so they're studying the rate of aging and trying to discover mechanisms to slow down the rate of aging in humans, like that. And they hired her, right? She was a professor in California, and good job. You can imagine they hired her by giving her just kind of an unlimited salary, like that, because they hired a bunch of really fancy scientists like that. So, we could talk about Foxo. We could have a course on Foxo, and you'd just be, at the end of every class, you'd be like that, right? Yeah, those people are really interested in naked mole rats. And you're like, wait, what? I've heard of those. Naked mole rats live a long time. Mice, their close relatives, live like 2 years. Naked mole rats live like 35 years, So, let's study those guys because they're mammals and they're closely related to mice. And we know so much about mice, right? And so we can compare and contrast naked mole rats, which we don't know that much about at the molecular level, genetic level, with those mice. And so they actually teamed up with a big mouse company up by Bar Harbor on Mount Desert Island, Jackson Lab, and they're just paying millions of dollars to Jackson Labs to show, this molecular understanding of the mouse, and they're contrasting it with that naked mole rat. And of course, they're doing lots of other stuff. But, right? You're just like, damn, that's good stuff, right? And I'm like, who cares about that crap, right? Foxo, and it didn't get in the nucleus. Oh, yeah, that's epic. Right? So that, like that. And then, again, I already said this, but people who study how students learn is the best way to do it is by writing it, drawing it, work it out, like that. I remember this student telling me once, years ago, he said, a friend said, let's have a study group, come over, and study, right? And he went over to this guy's apartment, and the guy had recorded all of Ken Weber's lectures in genetics. And then to study with this guy, he just suggested what they were going to do is just smoke a ton of pot and listen to Ken's lectures, like that. And I'm just like, yep, But yeah, that's just letting you know that's solid learning. It's going to be more like this, on your feet. Oh, I just love it. Because the student thought it was just great. The student's like, study group, yeah. And the other student's like, yeah, man, I won't study group that, And you're also, you're creating the study guide. You're learning, you're active, you're also building that. So we'll try to talk about that and help you with that. Okay, next thing is there's a student named Riley. And Riley took this class last year, and Riley really liked it. And he's a student here. And Riley wants to go to medical school. And Riley's going to help teach this. He's also going to be a tutor, and he's a super nice guy. We have the Learning Center, so we have access to that tutoring over there. This is an advanced course. So for our course, the Learning Center can help you with study skills. Like, we have to make a lot of flashcards of drawing. Like, I really don't get that. What's good with that? And time management, right, like that, and tackling topics like that. So the Learning Center is helpful for you, but not the nuts and bolts. Like none of the people over there know like Foxo and 1433. But Riley does, and he's super psyched and he's super nice. And so he's going to help us teach, and he's going to be our special tutor. So he's coming to class a week from Thursday, and he's going to talk for a little bit about a certain topic. So in addition to being tutor, we're going to meet Riley, and you'll have his email address, and you can meet with him. One thing I always tell students, a lot of times, it's uncomfortable to meet with me or a tutor one-on-one. That just can be weird. Because when I was in college, I was no way I would go to my professor's office hours. There's just no chance. In my college, all the professors were 100 years old, and I was afraid they would die when I was talking to them. Seriously, I had a professor who fell asleep in class giving a lecture. And we just snuck out, and he was so embarrassed the next class period. He kind of was crying a little bit about it because we didn't know we were, college students, and he was up there, and then he sat down, and he was talking, and he just tripped it off. He's like, darn it, Howard, what do we do now? We want to learn, buddy, Oh my God. Yeah, and so I wouldn't go to, no way would I go to office like a Howard, I'm just like, he's so fragile, right? And so I know that. So a solution to that is to go with a friend, right? Another classmate, right? And so you can set up times to meet Riley and just, with a classmate, say, let's team up. And, we'll sit down with Riley or sit down with me and do that. So Riley's going to be our tutor. He's also going to come to class over the semester, and he's going to talk about a topic. So that's another really good, powerful learning thing, and that is novelty. Like we make these clay model videos, and that's novel. We're going to work with clay in class, That'll help you remember it, because it's like a clay thing. Like I remember in 3rd grade, we made paper mache globes, right? Totally remember that, right? Because I just didn't make paper mache that much. So Riley's like a novelty. So think of Riley, we think of this topic that's called CAR T-cell therapy, like that. It's an immunology topic. Riley took immunology. Riley loves immunology. He's doing research in the immunology lab. But I'm going to be here talking when Riley starts diving into immunology, like he will. I'll say, Riley, not an immunology class. Only 3 of the students took immunology, right? So we're not going to go deep into immunology. So we're going to use Riley as like an expert of this specific type of therapy, which is talked about briefly in the last chapter in our book. But it's like Foxo, it's fantastically cool. My son-in-law went to medical school at the University of Pennsylvania, and that's a place where they did pioneering research on CAR T-cell therapy. And when the FDA approved it for use, there was a spontaneous parade through the hospital, past patient rooms, all the doctors and nurses marching through the hospital celebrating that. It's about 10 years old, we'll say, like that. And it's just phenomenal. The CAR part stands for, and we'll talk about it. Riley will teach us about it, right? I will help, but Riley will be our kind of go-to person for that one example. And the CAR stands for chimeric antigen receptor. So it's like this, where that's a receptor, and the scientists have built a modified gene that makes a modified receptor. That's called the chimeric antigen receptor. So that's why we're really interested in it, because we really like genes, and it's a really good example. Then it's used to treat cancer, and we're heading toward that. So that's why it's in our last chapter in our book. Last chapter in our book is about some therapeutics, right? And it's freaking fascinating. Building this gene is called synthetic biology, right? We take natural biology and we start manipulating it. And it's a good way to learn the principles, right? By manipulating them, right? I talked about that in the clay model videos, The gene is made up of 2 parts, and we can, in a test tube, mix and match them, like that, right? So CAR is about that, and then it's about a certain type of cancer therapy, and they just have the pedal to the metal, because it's successful for certain kind of blood cancers, like a lymphoma, leukemia type cancer, but not on solid tumors, like brain cancer, pancreatic cancer, and so forth. And so, but they've got just, so much money to try to advance it. So it's a kind of synthetic biology. It's also exciting because it's what you would call cellular therapy. It's a CAR, modified receptor, in a cell called a T cell. It's part of our immune system. So it's a kind of cellular therapy, and that's new. All the other kind of therapy would be like drugs, chemical, or surgical, or radiation, like that. This is cellular therapy, and it's the new thing, like that. New advent of that, and will be applied to lots of other things, right? So it's a great topic, and it's novel, and we want to sort of package it and kind of go through it a couple of times. And so Riley's going to come on next Thursday and talk, first just a little bit about it, right? Like that. So good. So we'll get there, and I'll share Riley's address, email address, next week when he's here, and you'll have that tutor. So I think that's really good, be valuable. He's a really nice person. And here's just an image of, lots of stuff in the science news, hardcore science news. It's also in the public news too. I have a friend who was 50 years, passed away last year from a lymphoma. Lived in Maine, 50 years old, mother of 3, like that, big grown kids. And she had lymphoma. And they gave her the traditional treatments here in Maine. And she went into remission. Things were going well. And then it came back. And she got really sick. And they were trying to figure out whether they'd take her down to Boston. The doctors were trying to figure out whether they'd take her down to Boston where they do CAR T-cell therapy. But it's still considered, even though it's FDA approved, it's still considered experimental somewhat. So you only would get it as a last resort. And it turns out in her case, she got too sick here in Maine before they had it, all decided that she should get it. And so she was too sick, and she went to, you know what that's called when you go to you don't go to the hospital, you go to hospice. She went into hospice and passed away, like that. So it's very real, very successful, very real, right here, right now, in Boston. But still just millions of dollars, treatment, and, they're working on it. Super cool. And we'll package it as Riley. Riley is our CAR T-cell therapist, right? Like that. Okay, great. Okay, so now we'll just talk through some stuff in the syllabus. We're doing great. Anybody have any questions or issues they want to deal with? Like that? Okay? And just stuff. So me. And then I have some office hours, but I don't sit down because I'm super available throughout the week. And so if you want to find me, just send me an email and say, I'd like to schedule a meeting. Suggest a couple of times. Let me know if you want to meet in person or Zoom, like that, and we'll schedule it. And we can meet a bunch, right? And why would we meet? Talk about our course, then also advising, career, other courses, internships, future. I'd like to do that a lot. And I've been here a long time, and the professors are standing still, and the students are going by. I know you're unique, because I've known so many unique USM students. Yeah, like Chris Pelletier. Dang, man, super unique. All right, Chris worked in my research lab, and at some point I just asked Chris, why do you want to be a scientist? And Chris immediately said, because that's the career path on which I'm most likely to acquire a superpower. You're like, okay. He grew up in northern Maine and believed that the way scientists are depicted in comic books is real. Like that those were, like Spider-Man was a guy who was in a lab and got like hit by a bolt of lightning and now had spider superpowers. Literally. Yeah. Chris went and got a PhD, and he's a genius. He's an incredible genius of a person. Because that happens, right? Here's a genius born up in, the county. That happens, right? They just get born randomly, but man, he's a genius. And he works in New York City at a company named 3D Bio, where they're using 3D printers with ink using human stem cells and then components of the extracellular matrix to print human tissues. Like that, And they're working on getting ready to print a kidney, a living kidney. And you're just like, go get him, Chris. Because it's perfect for his weirdo thing like that, Like just a weirdo thing. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I think we should do that. I went on a walk with Chris. I went with Chris, and I was like, when he was first getting going on this, and I said, and so he's a nerd, like a, Star Trek nerd kind of guy. And I said, well, what are you guys talking about printing? And he said, like human ears. And because he's a nerd science guy, or, whatever, science fiction guy, I said, right away, like, oh, you mean like Vulcan ears? Because like on Star Trek, Mr. Spock has those Vulcan ears. And Chris says this, because he's such a weirdo. And unique. And my whole point is he's unique like you're unique. Chris says, we talked about it, but we decided it would be too profitable. Just, it's a company. It's a company, and they're like, no, we don't want to go there. We don't want to make that much money, right? And so I say to Chris, who wants Vulcan ears? And Chris, all my friends. And you're just like, oh my God. Anyway, you're unique. But also, you remind me like you're interested in dental school, right? So your career interests have similarities, right? So my advising, you're interested in this or that, I know resources on campus, around town, to connect with. And all professors do, right? You should take advantage of that, right? Talk to them about how can I help with that, right? So we can meet. Then we got a textbook. And we're not going to use Brightspace very much. Then we have a format. And this is on the syllabus, so you don't have to read it really carefully right now. But I record all the lectures, and I post them on YouTube, and I send you the link. So I'll send you the link today. And sometimes the technology fails, and when it does, I'm sorry, but it did, But it almost always works. And that's weird, because then why would you come to class? And I have a lot to say about that. The first one is, when you're teaching people interested in science, the number one thing about science is curiosity. When I say CAR T-cell therapy, some of you are just going to be Googling that, right? And thinking about it, totally derailed. What about this? What about that? That's the scientist, that we want to nurture that, right? Then another thing is you're skeptical. I doubt that. Googling that, I doubt that, right? Those are really good things. And they're totally distracting. So we have to record it. Then there's also really important stuff that happens every day, and it wouldn't help if you missed class and you got your classmates' notes. We're going to emphasize good notes, but they're not good enough, and so you've got to have access to that, right? But then why come to class, right? You're driving down from Skowhegan, why are you coming to class, right? So it's a tricky thing. We're in a kind of, a transition in educational technology where I got to record it. I just have to. It should be that for all of them. But then we got to make this into a participatory thing where you're really participating and we're talking about it. We're doing concept chats, which we're not going to do today, but we will. Somehow make this worthwhile. We'll have assignments, try to do that, right? So attendance is required. And I say on here that I'll take an attendance sheet. So here's one coming around, and you just sign your name on there. And if you don't attend, then within the next week, you have to take notes, take pictures, and email them to me to demonstrate you attended. That's because it's ongoing learning. You just can't crunch this in the night before exam. But Chris Pelletier thought he could, just crunch it in. That's what college students do. But we have to keep learning. So we got to participate like that. And it says on here you have to participate in if you either attend or take notes and send me pics within a week. And that's just ongoing. And even if you're sick, right, within a week, you could pull that off, or your car's broken. And if you miss class, you do not have to send me an email, right? Say, oh, my car broke, right? Of course it did, right? Or, family, like have daycare issues, things like that. Just deal with it and participate. And I say, if you miss more than 3 of those participations, then I could give you a lower grade, It's not something you're getting graded on, but it could decrease your lower grade if you don't do it. And then I also say 10. You have to try to attend and miss less than 7, like that, right? You're going to miss a few, but, you're going to miss less because you're just not really participating. And that's what participation means. Participation doesn't mean ask questions like it usually means. It just means attend or take notes and send me the pics, like that. And we'll talk about that some, but that's just how my courses are, because I have to record. I just have to, it should be a law for science classes for those reasons and more. Okay, so there's that. Then grading. So we're going to have 3 exams. The final exam is going to cover everything, and we're going to have a term paper of quizzes, assignments. And you'll get a letter grade for these, so you'll get a score, a number, but you'll get a letter grade, so you'll understand. You got a B on your first exam. You're getting a B for the course so far. Hope you understand it. There's down here a quick way where a person can convert those letter grades to GPA numbers and calculate their grade, and we'll talk about that as we go on. I went to college where the students were hyper focused on grades. So I respect that. I'm trying to grade you carefully, accurately, and give you the best grade I can, like that. So you'll understand where you're at in this course, like that. And it's a hard course, so you'll struggle with it, but you'll understand where you're at for grade as we go through, and we'll talk about that. So that's on the syllabus. And then the concept chat, and again, it's on the syllabus, and we talk a little bit about it. Then next thing is for our course, I say you're going to have to write a term paper. It's going to be a pretty big part of your grade, so it's going to be something you have to do a good job on. And I have an option. You can either do a term paper or do a teaching activity that's called the 4-H STEM Ambassador Program, where you volunteer to do that instead of writing a term paper. And it's a system. There's a leader called Sarah Sparks, and you go through a little training, and then you go out to a classroom of like about 4th graders, about 4 times, and teach them a topic in STEM. It won't be biology probably. It'll be something about wind power or fish migration. Because they have the kits, and they supply you these kits. And so what you need to do is go through the scheduled training, then go out to this classroom, and you need to prepare. You'll have a partner, and it could be someone from our class or just another college student, and you go out. And it's super good like that. So you've got an option. The bottom line is it would take you a little bit more time to do the STEM ambassadors than to write the term paper. So that's one option. But the term paper is going to be due end of the semester when you've got a lot of stuff going on. The STEM ambassadors are spread out. Then, though, this goes right on your resume. And whatever you do after college, job or more school, people see that and they're like, what the heck is that? STEM Ambassador Program? Or there are people, if you don't know what 4-H is, there are people who did 4-H and they're like, what the heck is that? I love 4-H. I freaking love 4-H, right? So it's you're not putting a term paper on your resume, but this is something that could be, it is just a really nice thing, right, like that. And then you get this experience. It turns out it's a good experience to get up and give a little presentation. And the kids, right, they're all kids, right? They'll hold your leg and be like, I can't believe you're a real college student, like that. And you're just like, oh, I'm having a good day, right? Right? You're like, I got a bad grade today. And they're like, yeah, but you're really smart, like that. So if you can do it, do it. And so that's some on our syllabus. There's a link to a website to describe it. And then the statewide coordinator is named Sarah Sparks. Sarah's amazing. Sarah could find a place for you in the school where you went to school, like that, right? Like make that kind of connection. Or, the town where you live, or on your commute, like that. Because it's a statewide thing, and she can find them here in Portland. You could walk to them, like that. So Sarah's great. And you don't have to scramble to write this down, but, there's a training schedule that comes up, and it starts like February 7th. So we need to make this choice, in the next kind of week. You need to decide, I'll write a term paper or that. If you do the STEM Ambassador Program and you finish it, which just means do what Sarah says and do that, you get 100 points for that, right? So when I grade your term paper, you might get 100 or a 90 or a 70, like that, right? I'm grading that. This is just do it, 100, yep.
So these overlap with Flashcards?
Oh, they might. If they do, and probably they'd be superior to do, I'll thank you for saying that because I hadn't looked at the specific one, but I'll send an email to Sarah and she'll work that out for anybody like that. Yep, yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so that's just that. The term paper is described on our syllabus, and if you're going to do that, we'll talk about that some in class, but it's mostly an independent activity that we'll do in class. All right, we're doing great. Next thing, and we have another 5 minutes of class, is the dates. So I just kind of have a bare bones syllabus here, not all the dates with all the topics, because we're going to go with the flow and the chapters, and we'll announce everything ahead of time, but we'll just go as fast as we can based on how things are going and the questions and stuff like that. So we'll announce stuff ahead of time. Quizzes and assignments. We'll have a quiz next week, assignment next week. When we do stuff in class, it'll be announced in class, and there's no makeup for it because it's just too much to say, oh, I missed and that, right? And it emphasizes try to be here. Now, if you miss class, what you're going to do, and you miss a quiz, which could happen, there are only a small number of points. We want to get them, and they help. But if you miss, I write down, you didn't take it because you missed, right? So it doesn't hit you that hard. But it is another motivator to try to get here. Don't come if you have COVID, blah, blah, blah. But, try to do it, and there's just no makeup for that. And, we'll deal with that. then we have our dates for our big things, like our exams. Those are fixed in rock, so you can know and start planning about that. And then I talked about some of that stuff. If class is canceled, another thing about this recording is I just record it. If we have a snow days are gone, like that, because I'll just record it and send it out, and you're like, you have to come in and do your class now. All right, so that's that. We're going to talk just a couple minutes longer. It's 10:40, and so now on to our course sum. And I talked about this at the front end, right? How we're off to the side, and we just need to be careful about popping up with examples. That's hard. Like genetics is a course that's taught, and those examples are all from these different topics that you may have had or not. And in some cases, you're like, I don't know much about immunology, or I don't know that much about neurobiology. Yeah, so we have to be careful about that. And to do that, we're going to focus on cancer biology, and there's our author, and he's a good guy. I think he's at Boston University and has been there kind of a whole career. He started out in graduate school in Wisconsin, Wisconsin, and he's actually studying a virus, a certain kind of virus called a retrovirus. And he happened to work in this lab of this guy, Howard Temin, and Howard Temin won a Nobel Prize, and we'll talk about it. Back in 1970, about is when this Jeff Cooper started out. So, about 50 years ago, he was your age and starting out in science. And he started out there, and then he finished his PhD, and he got something called a postdoctoral fellowship, do more research at Harvard, and then he got a job at Boston University, and he's been a professor there since, like that, And he's been writing this book a long time, and his whole career has been on those molecular pathways, like we looked at with FOXO. His have been really focused on cancer biology. So growth factors, like we showed, a growth factor stimulates the cells to grow and divide. Well, genes that are on that pathway could have a mutation and make a defective protein. It's overactive, less reliant on that growth factor, stimulated a cell to grow and divide, that's cancer, like that. And so, that's his thing. And he's writing a general book in cellular molecular biology, but it's all leaning toward that. So it's very good text to use for the purposes we have of kind of emphasizing that. And I'll just show you this. You don't have to scramble to write this down. But it shows some proteins that were found in retroviruses. So he started out in Wisconsin studying these viruses, and they were a certain kind of virus called retrovirus. In the 1970s, scientists started to identify that there were about 24 of these retroviruses, none of them at that time from humans, from other species like mice, rat, bird, monkey, like that. And there was a curious thing about those group of retroviruses, not all retroviruses, but those retroviruses, certain variants or versions of them would immediately cause cancer upon infection. And then in the 1970s, our author and lots of other people discovered the reason those altered retroviruses are causing cancer in those non-human animals is because they had actually picked up some of the animal's own DNA, and it was that DNA that was causing cancer. And so they identified some genes they called oncogenes, because oncology is the study of protein. And these were genes that were normally in our body that could cause cancer if they were defective, somehow. And this is a long time ago, right? They had a hard time studying stuff like that. And they started finding those in the 1970s with this early war on cancer. And that's his whole career. He worked on one that is called RAS. And we'll learn a lot about RAS, like that. So it's a good thing, and it's a good way. And we're not going to talk about the history of biology, but we are going to reach back to that 1970s and see that the advent of understanding what genes could cause cancer and why, how they identify them, and what they knew. So again, you don't need to scramble to write it down, but there's RAS right there, like that mouse retrovirus. Upon infection, if it has this mutant RAS mouse gene in it, it causes cancer. Okay, so we're going to stop there, and that's it for today. And like I said,